Hey, welcome back, everyone. As you can see, I am on the road yet again, and not a long trip this time, just here for a whistleblower interview I'm getting. I'll keep you all updated on this soon, hopefully something good to show you. That said, some big stories to go into tonight. First of all, the Department of Homeland Security, it looks like they're setting the stage for a big case of censorship. It looks like they're lining up the cards, essentially, in order to really go after online social media posts and online, forums and things like this, because they're claiming, as one part of this, they're claiming that terrorist groups are using the internet, using social media sites as a way to censor. Now, this is different than if these websites were censoring themselves. If Facebook, Twitter were removing Al-Qaeda and ISIS profiles and accounts, an ability that these websites have demonstrated they're fully capable of, because they do it to Trump and Trump supporters. They've demonstrated they're totally capable of this type of moderation, but they don't do it for some reason to terrorist groups. And there's a difference, folks, between a company voluntarily removing things that advocate for violence, that call for terrorist attacks, and being forced to do so through government action. It seems to be the case that the Department of Homeland Security is lining up the cards for that type of government action, and I'll explain why this is important. Also, folks, Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, he's up to something right now. And I've been talking to some other, China experts about this. That said, we're going to have another webinar pretty soon with some China experts discussing the Chinese economy. But let's put it this way. We're facing a global financial crisis. The Chinese Communist Party plays a big role in that. And the CCP is doing a lot of things right now that look like they're not trying to fix it. It looks like the CCP is trying to make things worse. Or at the very least, if you intended to make things worse, you would do what the CCP is doing right now. Xi Jinping is up to something. I'm going to be discussing a bit of what's happening in China right now, because, folks, this could impact all of us pretty soon. Also, I wasn't going to talk about it, but I think it's important to. I want to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse case. This was, of course, the teenager who shot 3 people in Kenosha, killed 2 of them. And, of course, he's on trial right now for murder. It's not looking – the trial, it looks like it's more in his favor right now, because, frankly, the videos strongly suggest that it was out of self-defense. But I'm going to be talking about why this case matters in terms of culture, in terms of politics in the United States, because it's actually more, I would say the argument and the reason it's so politicized right now is not because people care so much about, violence taking place during these riots. Frankly, a lot of people got killed during these riots, and you don't see people on the other side going to jail for it, not much at least. And at the very least, people aren't talking about it. But this could have serious implications, real serious implications on the right of self-defense. And in my analysis, I would say that is the real significance of this case. I'm going to be talking about that tonight as well. Actually, a lot of other stories also. Folks, as usual, around the halfway point of this show, we're going to go into questions. So if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. All right, that said, let's go to the first story. I want to talk, first of all, about what the DHS looks like it's doing. And let me explain. Now, I've been explaining the Department of Homeland Security looks like it is setting things up right now to begin going after websites for censorship. And let me explain what they're doing and how this could play out, and based on my analysis, right? All right, so first of all, Epic Times story says DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked terrorists are exploiting online presence to encourage attacks in the United States. And it says here, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on Wednesday issued a terrorism advisory warning that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked terrorists are likely to maintain an online presence in an attempt to inspire U.S.-based individuals to engage in violent activity following the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Now, important point here, just to explain some of this. Why is it, or how is it, that ISIS and Al-Qaeda can have online activity? It says here, are likely to maintain an online presence. Why is it that they are likely to maintain an online presence? It's because while Twitter, just as one example, censored and deplatformed the president of the United States when Trump was still president, while they deplatformed Trump after Trump actually wrote tweets calling for people to protest peacefully and to even leave the protest on January 6th. Ironically, they pulled that offline and claimed he was advocating for violence. While they did that, they've allowed, for example, the Taliban to maintain an account, to maintain an online presence. These websites, these terrorist organizations, actual terrorist organizations, are able to maintain an online presence because the platforms themselves have chosen to not censor them. But they've demonstrated the ability to censor if they desire to. They've demonstrated the ability for significant political censorship. Why are they not censoring actual terrorist organizations calling for lone wolf attacks? Now keep that in mind. Let's go to the next part of it. It says here, a senior this is further into the story. A senior Homeland Security official told CBS News that foreign groups are trying to encourage violence by lone wolves. Now, lone wolves are like self-starter terrorists. It could be anybody. It means it's not necessarily an organized terrorist act, but because they're advocating and calling the act upon them. Now, why does this matter? Because the Department of Homeland Security and mainstream media, the DHS and the MSM, are together really trying to make this case. They're really drumming up this point that there's somehow now a risk of terrorist attacks in the United States from Al-Qaeda, from ISIS, of course, terrorist organizations, because they are allowed to have an online presence. Now, they have an online presence only because the platforms that have demonstrated the ability to moderate content like this are choosing to not moderate it. And why are they not choosing to moderate it when they do it so vigorously and aggressively against people they disagree with politically? They really make a strong case, right? They really make a strong case that they have the capabilities and the active intent at these websites to censor when they find it necessary, to remove content that calls for violence. Remember, folks, that very narrative was why all these different companies deplatformed Parler right after January 6th, even though most people who actually organized for January 6th did it on Facebook. The platforms, not just social media websites, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so on, but even the technology institutions themselves, Amazon Web Services and others, have demonstrated this ability. Why are they allowing actual terrorist groups to maintain this presence? Well, the simple answer for that was because is very likely they're setting the stage for regulations. By setting the stage for regulations, by choosing to not regulate content like this, an ability they've demonstrated they have, by choosing to not do it, it means that the government now has a reason, if there is a terrorist attack, to create sweeping laws to target online content. Because now they've set the stage. They've set things up in a way where if something happens, they can say, aha, we warned you about it. We told you this would happen. We said that there was content that needs to be moderated, and look what it led to. Look at this attack. If there is an attack, this can now be the narrative very, very easily. And why is that significant? It's because what's happening right now is a huge shift in the online environment. For example, YouTube just removed dislikes. They announced they're removing dislikes. You have websites like Facebook really taking possibly a big hit. Now they're moving to this whole meta platform, which is like a, online virtual community thing. But Trump is looking to start his own social media. New tech is coming about. New tech that could very easily replace these companies. And what happens then if these companies then lose their hold on public discourse? If these companies lose their ability to censor people because people go to other platforms, it means that the censorship, the ability to prevent people from having open discussions, the ability to stop that is then gone. And frankly, I would argue that a lot of the narratives, a lot of the false narratives going on are only able to exist because of the environment of censorship. And so, in other words, they can't just have platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Twitter, YouTube, and so on censoring. If they want to maintain information control, They need to do it from the stance of regulations. They need to create federal regulations that can also censor new tech, because new tech is about to really take a big, really take off in this country. Now, this is purely my analysis, but when I read this story on DHS, that's the light bulb that went off in my head. Take it for what it's worth. That's my personal analysis. I'm going to be going a bit more into this, folks, but I should mention first, we are still demonetized by YouTube, talking about the necessity of new tech. And those of you on Epic TV, I appreciate it also. But folks, we do have sponsors, and tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed prices on things rising, such as inflation, food prices, and so on. With a government that's now printing trillions of dollars and consumer prices getting higher, inflation is now a reality. So I'm happy to announce to you today the show's sponsor, which is American Hartford Gold. They have some ideas on how to diversify a portion of your portfolio. They say it's with physical gold and silver. Physical, you can hold it in your hand. And this can help. They can also help create a precious metals IRA and a 401k for you, something that will not be as susceptible to inflation. And they make it easy as well. Now, they're one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied customers. You can call them right now, and they'll give you up to $1,500 of free silver on your first order. You can also call them at 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. Big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring tonight's episode. Now, speaking of federal regulation on social media, we now see the beginnings of this. Now, keep in mind where this is going. The DHS is now laying the foundations for us. The DHS is now making a serious case that if a terrorist attack happens, it's because terrorists were allowed to organize on social media. Therefore, the only way to prevent this, because the social networks can choose to censor or not, the only way to prevent this at that point is to have federal regulations. Now, what was the big debate we recently had on Facebook? You had this Facebook whistleblower, a very strong leftist, go and testify before Congress. And during her testimony, really made the case that these websites, they're not censoring violent content. They're not censoring content as much as they should. The argument she made was not that these websites censor people politically. It's that there was not enough censorship. That was the claim. That was the case, which led a lot of people to believe that maybe she was a plant and so on. There was a lot of theories going around about her and what she was really there for. The case she made was that we need more censorship from the government level. Now we see the beginnings of this. Here's another story. It says, Facebook might be forced to offer algorithm-free option under a new bipartisan bill. Now, in my opinion, this is technically a good thing. But let me explain why this matters. This is technically a good thing. It means, of course, these websites have algorithms that determine what content you're shown and which content you're not shown. They can actually use this for censorship. They can use this specifically for political censorship. Now, let me explain what this says, and I'll go a bit deeper into it. It says this. A bipartisan collective of House lawmakers introduced legislation on November 9th that would require big tech providers, such as Google and Facebook, to allow users to opt out of content selected by algorithms, providing additional transparency regarding content. The measure, dubbed the Filter Bubble Transparency Act in the House, would make platforms with more than 1 million users and $50 million in annual revenue notify users of algorithm usage and allow users to determine settings. Now, personally, folks, I would love to be able to just turn off all the algorithms. I don't like when websites can, serve me different content and not show me stuff as they, choose to not show me stuff. Personally, I don't like the fact they even use, of course, data they take from us and resell it and things like this. Now, this will very likely not stop all of this. It merely gives you very likely the options to turn it off. But why does this matter? It's because now you have the government, the federal government, looking to begin to regulate content that can or cannot be shown to you. When they start creating legislation typically it's like a foot in the door. It's the beginning of something. And then next year they can expand the regulation. Once they establish precedents, once precedence is established, yes, they can create regulations on content. Then they can begin expanding that using that same precedence, which is why personally I would oppose things like this, even if technically I agree with the need for it. And this is one of the elements, I'd say, of law enforcement in general. One of the things we should talk about when it comes to the way that, let's say the legal systems in this country work, is that, of course, the way legal systems work, the way freedom works, let's put it that way, is that, yes, if you have free speech, you are sometimes going to hear things you don't like. There's plenty of things I don't like to hear. There's plenty of things I disagree with. Do I want them to silence those people, though? No, I don't. Because even though I might disagree with some things, even though I might believe that certain ideas are bad or certain opinions are just not accurate, it's that marketplace of ideas, first of all, that allows for discourse to take place and for bad ideas to be debunked. But second of all, because as soon as they begin regulating things, that sets the stage, that sets the foundation for regulations that can then expand and begin targeting other things as well. And when you're dealing with things like this, when you're dealing with, again, the beginnings of regulation, also you start to deal with the fact that should they create new powers to begin getting rid of practices that aren't actually illegal, but that go against, let's say, some groups' personal interest, but set the stage for greater regulations that could really have a serious impact, a real serious impact on our freedoms. Again, it's some of the issues you deal with. Now, in my opinion, if you don't like Facebook, delete Facebook. If you don't like the algorithm, stop using the platforms. Go to new tech. In fact, I deleted my Facebook account not soon after January 6th, after they began censoring people pretty strongly. And frankly, I'm glad I did. But folks, again, one of the problems you have with big tech in general is the monopoly. But that monopoly is about to be toppled, it seems, or very likely challenged, let's say. All right, folks, that said, I want to talk about Xi Jinping right now, what's happening in China, because, of course, China content was one of the big focuses of Crossroads for a long time. I've been focusing a lot more on U.S. content lately, but of course, I have a lot of background information on what's happening in China and a lot of, I think decent insights on it. And folks, what's happening in China right now is very strange. Let's put it that way. Because if you wanted to create a global crisis, if you wanted to damage the international economy, if you wanted to ruin your economy, you would do what the CCP is doing. You would do exactly what they're doing right now. Now, what is the intent behind this? I don't know. We'll have to see. But some very strange things are happening in China, and here in the United States as well. Let me explain. Now, it says here, China's rich list reshuffles as business regulations tighten. Now, it says here, Xi Jinping's crackdown, Xi Jinping being the head of the Chinese Communist Party, his crackdown on business has transformed the ranking of China's wealthiest people. As indicated by the Hurun China Rich List 2021, many familiar names dropped several places, while at least 9 tycoons have had their properties auctioned by the courts. The CCP is purging a lot of the wealthy people in China. Now it says here, there was a saying in China, this is the bottom of the article, but I won't go over the whole thing. There's a saying in China, the government's efforts to tightly regulate businesses has made becoming the rich in China the most dangerous occupation in the world. Because the CCP right now is basically going through the rich list, all these billionaires and big tech guys and big business, oligarchs and tycoons, and it is investigating them, it is purging them, it is getting rid of them. Now, the bigger picture of this is that the CCP is doing this in a lot of regards. It's also going after the entertainment industry in China. It's purging a lot of these Chinese celebrities. And if you look at these things piece by piece, you might say, well, that's kind of weird. it looks like piece by piece that the CCP is trying to gain more control over different parts of the system, whether it's entertainment, whether it's social discourse, whether it's finance, whether it's business, whether it's the new digital currency. But if you take it as a whole, it looks like the CCP is almost intentionally crashing its economy. When taken as a whole, it looks like the CCP is intentionally destroying the system that currently exists. And when taken as a whole, it looks like Xi Jinping, and we've talked about this in the show, it looks like Xi Jinping is rolling back all of the economic reforms you saw in the 80s and 90s and trying to reestablish a Mao-era type communist system. Now, the problem with this for the rest of the world is the way that the Chinese economy is intertwined with a lot of the world. Now, there are mixed analysis. I had some great discussions recently with some Chinese, Western economists, but focused on China. A lot of them don't believe this will affect the U.S. as we have been told as strongly as it will. But when you're dealing with what the CCP is doing, for example, shutting down ports, which is feeding into this global shipping crisis, when you're looking at the CCP, for example, messing with its entire electric system, there's a coal shortage in China. Part of that comes from coal regulations, meaning they're having blackouts across China, meaning factories are shut down, meaning the shipping crisis internationally is getting harder. Means they're feeding, of course, this shipping crisis. It means they're damaging the shipping ability of pretty much the entire world. If you understand circulatory systems, imagine blood circulating through your body, and the international trade is like the blood flow, right? The heartbeat of the entire world, the thing that keeps things flowing. The CCP is like jamming a rod into that. It's stopping the circulation of international trade by doing this. Now, take that in line also with the CCP feeding an energy crisis in a lot of regards, with the CCP through its influence at the United Nations also feeding a lot of these things, with the Chinese Communist Party telling people to hoard food, which is causing, of course, problems for Brazil and other countries, which is really setting the stage for much larger issues. Yeah, Buddy Mackey said Evergrande, of course, the Chinese real estate crisis. The Chinese real estate crisis right now. Evergrande, everyone's focused on Evergrande, but Evergrande is just one company. Evergrande is one real estate company, one of the largest, in a, let's say, in a crisis, a real estate crisis across all of China. Now, there's mixed analysis on how much that will affect us here in the United States, but it seems basically like the CCP, like Xi Jinping, is kind of almost intentionally destroying the Chinese economy. Now, why he's doing that, we can see, right? But keep in mind as well that the CCP appears to be trying to bring down the whole world with it. Because, folks, as we've discussed, the mask mandates, the economic shutdowns, the business lockdowns, the vaccine passports, the things causing people to lose their jobs right now, all of these policies, this is the Chinese Communist Party's model for dealing with the virus. And it is the model they have been promoting and claiming works because they've been lying about numbers in China, lying to the world, claiming they have the situation under control. The World Health Organization is repeating it, establishing global policy, and the world is adopting the policy as established by the Chinese Communist Party. And these policies are destroying the global economy. Now, at the same time, it also seems like there's some strange things afoot. Let me explain. I won't go over all this. Let me just tell you some headlines. I'll go over some headlines. First, China's factory inflation accelerates to 26-year high, yet demand remains weak, meaning it's very likely going to get even worse. At the same time, you have this factory inflation in China. Inflation in the U.S. is also at a high of around this same rate. LA ports in the United States are breaking records during supply chain crisis in terms of the pressure on them. Biden in the United States. Now, Biden is calling for a long-term view of economy as inflation has now soared to a 31-year high. 26-year high inflation in China, 31-year high in the United States. Isn't it funny that the, let's say, problems that in China right now are being echoed in the United States? Part of this is caused by that policy. Part of this is caused by bad policies lockdowns, economic shutdowns, other things, and the, let's say, domino effect of the shipping crisis and energy crisis, all of these things have to do with Chinese policies being reflected in other countries. And folks, as the United States is now facing an energy crisis, of course, Biden is now putting pressure to fix the economy. Biden, let me say this, Biden is responding to soaring inflation. This is another headline. Biden responds to soaring inflation, ordering the Economic Council to reduce energy costs. So, as a solution to the soaring inflation, and you have an energy crisis around the world, Biden is saying the solution to this crisis, soaring inflation, is to reduce energy costs. But what's he doing? Another headline. Biden might close, this is New York Post, Biden might close Michigan pipeline, White House admits, after calling reports bogus. They claim they wouldn't do it. And so while he's claiming the solution to fix inflation is to reduce the cost of energy, he's shutting down an oil pipeline, or talking about it in the White House tonight, and they've now admitted it. If you believed that the country is in crisis, and you stated publicly that the solution to that crisis is to reduce the cost of energy, why would you shut down an oil pipeline and constrain the supply? Of course, prices are based on supply and demand. If you constrict the supply, you increase the demand and prices go up. Why would you do that? Well, you tell me, folks, because the narratives here are not aligning. The narratives of what they're saying should be done is the opposite of what they are actually doing. Why is that? I don't have the answer to this. But again, as I've said with the CCP, if you wanted to destroy the economy, this is what you would do. Now, why they're doing that, who knows? But it's all very strange right now. Like I said, Xi is up to something. The Chinese Communist Party is up to something, and we're seeing the effects of it. Yeah, KB, you said Green New Deal, Great Reset. Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. If you wanted to make a great reset based on what they've said, this is what it would look like. Yeah, real depiction. He said, build back better. Yeah, maybe they want to break it so they could build back better. Just, hypothetically speaking, right? Anyways, we can't say what their intentions are. But if they wanted the Great Reset, as they've called it, this is what it would look like. This is what it would look like if that is what they wanted to do. Take it for what it's worth, right? All right, folks, I want to go into the Kyle Rittenhouse case and some of my analysis on this. But I want to go into questions first. We're at the halfway point. So if you have questions, do leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Again, we'll go into what's happening with Kyle Rittenhouse and that whole case and some of my analysis on why this actually matters culturally and why it matters in terms of law enforcement, because this could have ripple effects, which I believe is why the media is making such a big deal about it, which I believe why it's such a political battleground case. The real story is not about Kyle Rittenhouse. The real story is not about murder or self-defense. The real story is about the right of self-defense. And I'll explain after the questions. First, though, folks, again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Real quick, though, it is Veterans Day, and everyone, all the veterans out there, thank you. Thank you for serving this country. Thank you for defending us. Thank you for fighting the good fight against communism, against Nazism, against all the battles this country has fought to uphold the values of freedom. And folks, we have a special for you. It's over on Epic TV. And of course, if you want to support Crossroads, please go check out Epic TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. You can find the link in the description below. We have another show there called, it's Bo Davidson's show. He has a great episode, and it's his Blessed song. Now, he's an award-winning vocalist, an award-winning actor, great guy. I'll show you right now what he did for his Veterans Day special.
What is courage? are just ideals long forgotten. What is duty? What is glory? Are they just written down in some old story?
My fondest memory of World War II was the day when victory was declared over the Axis.
A good American cannot live without freedom. It's worth fighting for.
When we hear a word like freedom, do we know what it really means? Or do we take it all for granted, living like kings and queens? We are blessed to live in freedom, blessed to live in peace, blessed with food and shelter, blessed with life on lease, blessed to gather freely, blessed to have a voice, blessed that someone brave fought so we could have a choice. We are blessed. Oh, we are blessed.
We have the opportunity here in the United States of America to be what we want to be.
I've been several countries all over the world, and there's nowhere in the world like it is here in this country.
Is faith a notion or fear of hell? Or have we lost our very faith in faith itself? Is it our rock or is it madness? Or do we cling to it like rain in times of sadness?
Freedom is not just a concept. I think it's a way to live, and it's something we can give.
It's always been a family tradition in my family, and just to be a representative of the best country the world has ever known is my true blessing.
We've got guys who served in Pennsylvania, New York, Kentucky, Tennessee, and they come together and become one of the greatest fighting forces that's ever existed. And you wouldn't have had those friends, but they will lay down their life for you.
It is easy to remember, but easy to forget the beauty of our country and the simple gifts we get. 'Cause we are blessed to live in freedom, blessed to live in peace, blessed with food and shelter, blessed with life on lease, blessed to gather freely, blessed to have a voice, blessed that someone brave fought so we could have a choice. We are blessed. Oh, we are blessed to live in freedom, blessed with food and shelter, blessed with a life on lease, blessed to gather.
Blessing.
Unique example.
Happiness.
I'm honored.
Sacrifice.
Most blessed.
And blessed that someone brave fought so we could have a choice. We are blessed. Oh, we are blessed. We are
All right, that's Bo Davidson. He has a show on Epic TV called The Bo Show. If you haven't checked it out, be sure to, folks. Again, check out the link in the description below. And again, if you want to support Crossroads, you can tell a friend or family member about Epic TV. Helps us a lot, folks. Again, we have a lot of productions there. We're actually getting movies now, a lot of independent films. and we're working on getting a whole lot more. So stay tuned. A lot happened over at Epic TV. Again, thank you all for your support. And again, folks, a happy Veterans Day, and thank you to all the veterans out there again. Those I think I mentioned a long time ago, but I grew up in kind of a military household. I'm mixed race, in case you didn't know. And so my dad's side of the family is like Hawaiian Filipino, and meaning we had a big family and grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins. My dad and me all living kind of the same house, and so my grandpa was he is a retired officer in the Marines, and so grew up around a lot of that, and he was my hero growing up. So yeah, big thanks out to our veterans, folks. All right, that said, let's jump into some questions for the night. First off is from Cameron Bacon. You said, Josh, much like the Second Amendment allows the citizenry to defend themselves or traffic on freeways to be generally self-regulated, doesn't free speech allow the citizenry to self-regulate dangerous activity online? I see it often on Gab. Well, yes. Now, a couple points on that. First of all, there were a lot of arguments about this during the time of the Founding Fathers when the Constitution was first written. Jefferson and others talked about the marketplace of ideas, that just as the free market allows things that work to succeed and things that don't work to fail, right? That is the basis of freedom. The basis of freedom is that things that are able to work sustain themselves. They're able to keep going, but you're also able to fail. You can have things that don't work and they fail. One thing socialism tries to do is eliminate the possibility of failure. And by doing so, they prop up things that would fail and should fail, but they keep them up. They keep them up anyways. You have a zombie society at that point. You have a system of failure that has become institutionalized. Things that would never survive, they are dead. Things that would never survive in the free market, propped up through government subsidies. And those failing systems can then go and cannibalize, much like a zombie system, can go and cannibalize the things that function by eliminating competition, by strangling out things that would defeat it in the free market. That's what socialism does. And the same thing works with free speech. Now, the idea of the marketplace of ideas is just how the free market is able to regulate itself in this regard. The things that work succeed and things that don't work fail. In the same way with the marketplace of ideas, that through debate and so on, right? Through these types of things, that good ideas are able to prosper and bad ideas can be beaten down and die out. Now, the problem you have is that, frankly, a lot of bad ideas, people don't want to let them go. Remember what happened at the time of Trump, when 2016, when Trump was first elected into office. Media were complaining because they said the alt-right controlled most of YouTube. Those ideas that, this patriotic movement was dominating the online discussions. Funny memes and funny images, that was the dominating idea of the time. Now, they did not like the direction that was taking the country in. So what did they do? They regulated it. They deleted people's YouTube pages. They deleted people's Twitter accounts. They deleted all these things until they could sanitize the online environment and only allow the type of speech that they want to hear or they politically agree with. Now, that means, of course, that their ideas cannot function. Their ideas cannot survive unless other ideas are trampled on and gotten rid of. Again, just like this marketplace I was talking about, this free market, meaning that bad ideas, these socialist and communistic ideas, are maintained through, let's see, artificial intervention, censorship in this case. Now, that's essentially the idea that the Founding Fathers were getting out of the marketplace of ideas. And yes, in order to have free speech, in order to have, I'd say, the right of free speech, you are going to have things that are bad. But yes, people tend to shoot them down. They tend to debate things. And frankly, in debates, some people win arguments and some people lose arguments. That's the nature of debate. And what they're trying to do is end debate because they believe their ideas should not be debated, frankly. This is why they want to investigate parents who are calling into debate what is being taught at schools. This is why they want to stop online discussions over the debate of the safety of, let's say, shots you may be getting, things I can't even talk about on YouTube because of the censorship, right? That's the nature of these things. Now, that being said as well, when you get into even the idea of the free speech, even seditious speech is allowed in the United States. This goes back to the Aliens and Sedition Act, which Thomas Jefferson himself overturned when he became president. It used to be the case that seditious speech was actually illegal in the United States. Jefferson won the seat of the president and overturned that as soon as he came in, mainly because people so much disapproved of that. Seditious speech, even seditious speech, is constitutionally protected in the United States. Because again, this goes back to the Aliens and Sedition Act. And frankly, if that type of censorship if that type of speech wasn't allowed, I'm not saying I agree with it, but frankly, communism wouldn't be allowed to exist, because communism, by its very claims, calls for violent revolution, calls for the violent overthrow of all existing institutions. Communism would be illegal. If seditious speech were illegal, communism would be illegal. Think about that. Another question here from SGLE Master. You said, question, isn't our government starting to crack down on the rich too? Same all over the world. Yeah, they are here as well. And this is something that we see as a trend. Now, I talked, of course, a lot about what Xi Jinping is doing in China, where it seems to be the case that he's almost actively trying to destroy the Chinese economy. We see here in the United States as well that whether intentional or not, the policies are also really, I'd say, destroying the U.S. economy. Whether it's, again, maybe not so much the shipping crisis, but you could say things like different laws, regulating and restricting truck drivers in California are heavily causing the, gumming up of the ports. Issues like, for example, requiring, vaccine mandates for truck drivers. A lot of things being done are, in fact, the regulations are, in fact, feeding into that crisis. The regulations on the energy sector are helping cause this energy crisis, also feeding high costs because transportation and so on. The regulations on businesses and other things are causing other issues. And so, yes, whether intentional or not, we do see basically laws being brought in, causing what is very likely going to turn into a serious economic crisis in every part of the world, probably. Now, at the same time, they do seem to be cracking down on the rich, but they're doing it selectively. In China, for example, a lot of the people they're cracking down on are the enemies of the Xi faction. You have many rival factions in China. It's a lot of the Xi faction type enemies, or people they believe could be a threat. Here in the United States, one of the ironic things is, while typically socialists call for, getting rid of the oligarchs, typically socialism creates oligarchs. And typically, one of the weird reasons you have while businesses, you would think the millionaires and the billionaires are like the enemies of socialism. Typically, it's the millionaires and the billionaires who tend to support socialism, typically because state interventionism within their business institutions can essentially, render them immune to crisis. That interventionist systems means that they have what they call in China the iron rice bowl. It means that a failing system, the possibility of failure is therefore just cut out. Okay, there we go. Had me worried there for a sec. All right. We still on here? Let me double check. I'm on the road, so sometimes things are a bit funky. All right, another question here is from Chopper Carson. He said, question, do you remember back in mid-2020, the Chinese industrial sectors were told to plan to decouple from the American economy in 2022? I do remember seeing stories about that, and I do think sorry, folks, that was strange. The platform, yeah. So I don't know what's going on. It was very strange. The internet just cut out for a brief second. I'm back on though. Apologize for that. I am on the road, and so I'm using a mobile hotspot for my connection. It has pretty good speeds. I don't know why it's cutting out on me. I do apologize for that, but I'll continue on that. Yeah, you're asking about the 2020, the CCP talking about possibly decoupling from the U.S. Well, basically, the CCP is trying to get to a stage of economic independence, because the CCP is basically, its economy is on two different things. One is manufacturing. It's the manufacturing hub of the world, right? This production economy. It's losing that for a lot of reasons. One is foreign companies pulling out, not just the U.S., but India, Japan, a lot of countries even paying companies to leave. The CCP's ability to be like the economic hub of the world is under threat by sanctions, by countries not agreeing with the policies, by the CCP's very own programs, right? By the CCP's very own programs, tightening regulations on business leaders, these types of things. And so by doing that, they're basically eliminating the interest of a lot of companies to be in China, not to mention the sanctions as well. The other key part of the Chinese economy is real estate, which is also taking a huge hit right now. The CCP's economy is essentially in shambles. They're high tech. One thing they wanted to do to break out of this manufacturing bubble was get into high tech. That was basically strangled out because of the sanctions on chips. The Biden administration has actually kept a lot of these sanctions in place, which has been interesting to watch because I wasn't sure whether they would. But yeah, the CCP, for the sake of its own long-term survival, needs to, one, make sure the whole world goes down with it economically so it doesn't end up in a point of vulnerability, which, frankly, I think is what they're doing right now. They're trying to drag the whole world into an economic crisis based on the programs they're promoting, such as the many programs being used to regulate things under the virus. And at the same time, the CCP also needs to maintain internal stability within its economy. Now, we'll see what that means going forward, but that does seem to be what they're doing. Another question here. This is Molly John. You said, why is Biden crashing the U.S. economy at the same time Xi is doing the same in China? Question Crossroads. It's not clear whether they're doing this. Now, of course, it's not clear whether they're doing this intentionally or unintentionally. It could just be bad policy. And frankly, the adoption of policies that failed in China that are promoted by lies, like the idea that mask mandates and economic shutdowns work. That's the Chinese Communist Party's model. It could be that they're just believing what the CCP is saying. Keep in mind, a lot of these started under Trump. A lot of those policies started under Trump because, again, as he said, they were talking about these huge death tolls in China, and he said, okay, we need to lock things down. We need to have 2 weeks to slow the spread. Fauci was the one advising him, and they did it. And here we are now. It keeps spreading. It's possible they just got bad information, frankly, from the CCP because they were promoting this. It's also possible it's because they have this whole idea of this, Green New Deal, Build Back Better, whatever you want to call it, Great Reset, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same basic thing. It could be that they basically want to restructure things. They want to destroy things and restructure things, which we understand communism is how it typically works. It could be that as well. Now, can we say for a fact it is like that? No, we can't say for a fact it is like that. But if they were to do it, it would probably look a lot like this. Let's put it that way. Question here from Shannon Haney. You said, Josh, any detail on the reports of an unfolding hostage situation at the U.S. Embassy in Yemen? I've only seen some people posting about it. I do not have anything deep on that other than just claims of it happening. Question here from God, and I'll keep you updated if we hear any big updates on it. Godwin S. Indian. You said, question, our laws lately have been amended to seemingly destroy our nation's pillars of liberty, pursuit of happiness, and life. It seems like perception is everything now, even when it is not real. Good people who want to stand up for what is right. I'd agree with you. Now, keep in mind that the founding fathers, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, talked about the idea of God-given rights, life among these, meaning there were others. But among these being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, of course, being the right to life. Liberty being the right to liberty, which is pretty broad. We can look at the Bill of Rights as a model for the liberties we have. And we can also talk about the pursuit of happiness, oftentimes perceived as, something saying you are able to pursue happiness, whether that's, your pursuit of building the American dream, this white picket fence and a happy family and a good job and these types of things, right? Your right to pursue things as you choose. Different perceptions on the meaning of happiness, especially when you get into the Greek kind of Aristotle type view. If you look at Aristotle's ethics, happiness was synonymous with virtue, for example, and the practice of virtue, these types of things. And so, but yeah, I would agree with you that all these do seem to be under assault right now, because one thing you find, and this is where the debate often gets mixed up, is that some people, the socialists would claim, are incapable of achieving equality or happiness because they believe the game is rigged against them. And so the state should then intervene and restrict certain things. The problem is when you begin restricting things, you begin restricting the rights, you begin restricting the liberties, you begin restricting the ability to, say, pursue pursuit of happiness. You begin restricting those things for everybody else. The state then becomes a system that manages these things through the elimination of liberty. And once the state begins eliminating these things, you find that, frankly, it doesn't work as well, because it can't typically manage things to the minute levels of individual cases. And when people, lose their freedoms, frankly, for the sake of safety and, this idea of assured sameness, right, equality of outcome, you start finding that people lose their drive to even try, because why try if, regardless of your efforts, you're going to have the same result as someone who doesn't put in any effort? That's often the way that socialist systems kind of destroy themselves, frankly. And yeah, the irony is they're selling us freedom under the narrative of they're selling us slavery under the narrative of promoting freedom, right? They're selling us inequality under the narrative of creating equality. Because you can't force equality without, again, eliminating the equal rights of others. That's how it works. All right, folks, that's it. I'm going to go into some more stories for the night because it's getting a bit late. Real quick as well, we do now have the Crossroads Book Club. And those of you who want to check out our newsletter. We do have the Crossroads newsletter now, where we manage all the updates on the book club, including some quotes I like from the books each month. Be sure to sign up, folks. That's in the description below, and or you can just go to ept.ms/Crossroads exclusive newsletter. That's ept.ms/Crossroads exclusive newsletter. You can find the link in the description below. And again, a lot of people say they don't get alerts on YouTube, and also we have posts on other places. It's a great way to keep updated on what we're up to, a great way to keep updated on the special features we have, and a great way also to keep updated on the Crossroads Book Club and what's going on with that. All right, folks, that said, I want to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse case, because I wasn't going to get in the argument. You might notice I tend to not like talking about stories unless I believe they have broader cultural or social implications. And a lot of stories, I'd say, are just people kind of fighting with each other. You notice I don't like getting in the name-calling types of stories. I wasn't sure whether to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse case or not, but I think it's time to, because this actually does have pretty serious implications. The Kyle Rittenhouse case will very likely determine your right to self-defense, whether you have the right to defend yourself, because frankly, all the evidence is there, including people assaulting him, using similar tactics we saw during a lot of these riots, where people just like Kyle Rittenhouse in very similar cases were beaten to death. There were cases, demonstrable cases, recorded video cases, where people were beaten to death under the same conditions that Kyle was attacked under. There's also video evidence of Kyle himself being attacked by many individuals, and one of the individuals he shot even brandishing a weapon, pointing it at him. Frankly, a lot of the people they're calling in to testify aren't doing so well. The individual who brandished a firearm at Kyle and got shot in the arm by Kyle changed his statement several times while making his case when he called up to testify, and eventually admitted after being cross-examined that Kyle only pointed his gun at him after he first pointed it at Kyle. And so you have issues like this. For example, let's go into what the significance is of this, though. But first, I want to talk about a bit of what's happening in the case, because it seems the judge the judge appears very angry at the prosecutors, the people who are advocating against Kyle. And the prosecutors are doing things that any normal lawyers would know not to do. Any lawyer with basic ideas would know not to do what these lawyers are doing, which is raising some serious questions on what the lawyers are actually doing. In fact, the judge himself even questioned what they're up to. Let me explain this. Story here, it says, constitutional violation. Rittenhouse trial judge admonishes prosecutor. It says the judge presiding over Kyle Rittenhouse's murder trial twice on Wednesday admonished the top prosecutor in the case. Prosecutor Thomas Binger drew Kenosha County Judge Bruce Schroeder's ire, particularly when he ignored remarks the judge had made only hours earlier. Schroeder first ordered the jury out of the room. This is the judge, or ordered the jury leave the room at the courthouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, when Binger, the prosecutor, commented on how Rittenhouse, who's again the person being accused, had been silent since the shooting took place in August 2020. And folks, you have the right to remain silent. It's one of your rights. In fact, if you're being selected for jury and the judge asks and I know people have been asked this specifically when being selected for jury, if the judge asks you, if you watch someone and they choose to remain silent, they're asked a question and they just choose to not answer, do you believe that means they're guilty? And you say, yeah, well, of course, why would they be quiet? Why would they not answer if they were innocent? They will kick you out. You will not be accepted on the jury because you have the right to do this in the United States. And so the judge got very angry at the prosecutor for bringing this up, for calling this into question. And this is what the judge said. He said he's commenting. Sorry, this is a lawyer for Rittenhouse, Mark Richards. Mark Richards says he's commenting on my client's right to remain silent. He said the problem is this is a grave constitutional violation. The judge then intervened, and the judge said the problem is this is a grave constitutional violation for you to talk about the defendant's silence. You're right on the borderline, and you may be over, but it better stop. And the judge told this to the prosecutor. And then about 20 minutes later, the judge got angry again at the prosecutor and ordered the jury to leave the room, and then said this to the prosecutor. He said, I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. And he said that's basic law. That's been basic law in this country for 40 or 50 years. And the judge said something interesting, which the judge said, I don't know what you're up to the prosecutor. Now, there's been a lot of speculation on why the prosecutors are behaving in very strange ways, even behaving in ways where normally the case could even be thrown out over things like this. The prosecutors could lose the case in a way where the judge doesn't actually rule. The jury never decides, and the thing gets thrown out. Some people are saying maybe the prosecutor is doing this intentionally, and that's what he wants, because maybe they believe they can't win, right? What his intentions are, who knows? Take it for what you will, right? But I want to talk about why this case really matters, and why, frankly, a ruling on this case matters so much, and why people might not want there to be a ruling. Because the ruling on this case will determine whether you and I can defend ourselves if we are under attack. If you have people brandishing a firearm at you, if you're at a protest and someone pulls a firearm and points it at you, if people are chasing you and you are running and trying to get to the police to save your life, and you're forced to, well, fire upon them to defend your life while trying to reach the police because you're afraid for your life, if you do that, should you be charged with murder? Do you have the right to defend yourself in such an occasion? That is what this trial will decide. And I believe there are people who don't want that to be decided in this trial, frankly, because there's so much evidence, video evidence and otherwise, and the prosecutors have already kind of burned the case in a lot of ways. You even have people recording the jury and threatening to, dox or even attack the jury. There are so many people doing things that in normal cases could get an entire case thrown out, that it raises the question of, well, is that what they're actually trying to do? Now, when it comes to the right to self-defense, this is something written in the Constitution. We talked about the right to life, even in the Declaration of Independence. The right to defend yourself is considered a natural right. Even animals have the right to defend themselves. This is why animals have claws and teeth. This is why scorpions have stingers, why snakes have fangs, why hawks have talons. Every creature in this world has some form, some way, just about, not all, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them have some way to defend themselves. The right to self-defense is a natural right, going back to the Magna Carta, going into even regulations by the United Nations itself. The right to life is a fundamental right. The right to defend your life is a fundamental right. And what you're seeing right here is whether you have the right to defend your life when it is under threat, when it is, for example, in a circumstance that is politically divisive. That is what this case will determine. And it would make sense there are people trying to make sure that determination cannot be made. That being said, let me show you one quick thing. Because while Kyle Rittenhouse is being charged with this, the Black Lives Matter leader in New York has made a very interesting statement. The Black Lives Matter leader in New York, there's a video of him saying this. I can show you, it's on Twitter. He is threatening, quote, riots, fire, bloodshed if the New York City's new mayor, Eric Adams, gets tough on crime. You can see the video here. He's promising violence, bloodshed. He's promising riots. He's promising fire. This is an individual promising violence and arson, acts of violence and arson, saying they will do it if the new governor in New York, the new mayor in New York, governor in New York, Eric Adams, I'm sorry. If they restore some of these law enforcement systems to go after crime on the streets and so on. Normally, you would call that a domestic terror threat. If you're saying that you were going to engage in arson and you're going to engage in violence targeted randomly at the population of a city, one of the biggest cities in the world, typically, folks, that would be a domestic terror threat, an actual domestic terror threat. Now, will it be treated as such, or do we frankly have a politicized legal system that selectively prosecutes people based on political leanings? Whether anything happens with this will determine whether the government actually cares about domestic terror threats. When they claim that domestic terrorism is a threat, if they claim that arson and violence in the streets is something that constitutes actual crimes, and if people are threatening that based on political reasons, which is the definition of terrorism, using violence to achieve a political end, will they call it that when it's something that aligns with their own political views? A good way to think about this, if the Proud Boys were to make a statement like this, how would people react? If they were to come forward and promise that there would be riots, fire, bloodshed, what would the effect be? What would the reaction be? And will that reaction apply to this? And if there's a dual standard, if there's a double standard, why does that double standard exist? Important questions, folks, on whether we have equal protection under the law, whether Lady Justice is still wearing her blindfold, because justice is supposed to be blind, not done politically, not selectively enacted based on political interests. And that's one of the big concerns, I think, in this country, whether we now have actual justice or whether we have a politicized legal system that's acting solely on political interests, whether people are being charged or not charged because of their political positions. That is one of the big, I think, debates this country is having right now. Now, we'll see what happens with this. We'll see if anything happens to him, and we'll see what the effects will be. Especially, frankly, folks, and keep in mind, they're promising riots again. The Kyle Rittenhouse case is going to determine whether you could protect yourself amidst those riots. And also, right as the Supreme Court right now is determining whether people in New York City, where they're promising these riots, have the right to a concealed carry, are able to carry firearms and possibly defend themselves, much in the way that Kyle Rittenhouse defended himself. That's where this debate is at right now. And I think that's what the significance is of this case. We'll see what happens with it, because this is, I think, going to determine a lot of things going forward. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, so I'll call it a night. It's always a pleasure talking with you all. Again, happy Veterans Day. Thank you all for our veterans out there as well. Thank you for all you've done for this country. Folks, if you want to support Crossroads, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It does help this channel. If you want to go the extra mile, please tell your friends and family members about Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. You can find a link to that in the description below. Folks, I'll show you a trailer again at the end of this episode. We now have an exclusive documentary, a new one coming out. It's going to be out tomorrow. It's under another one of our shows. But it's called Hunt for the Virus Origin, Lab Secrets, CCP Cover-Ups, and the Next Deadly Pandemic. A documentary you probably can't show on YouTube. It's going to be exclusively on Epoch TV. Be sure to check it out tomorrow. That's under another one of our shows. A great show as well. Be sure to check it out. I'll show you the trailer at the end of this episode, folks. That said, as always, thank you for being here. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.
240 million people infected. 5 million reported dead. The world's resources, its top scientists, have been enlisted in the pursuit of the virus origin.
Did you find anything?
Following the last mission to China, there were more than 36 recommended studies that needed to be carried out.
After 2 years, we seem no closer to locking in the origin of the virus. This is owed in no small part to the hindrance of the Chinese regime.
And he said, Rich, he said, you know, my lab would get into serious trouble if we helped you. He said China would find out, undoubtedly, and they would label us as enemies of China.
What is it about the virus's origin that is being so intensively concealed? And what could it tell us about the next grave danger the world faces?
Cut our links with China so they can't spread the disease.
In my reporting, I've kept a close eye on China and its ruling regime to find out who and what was behind the outbreak. I knew I had to dig beneath the Communist Party-led headlines and political rhetoric. No one would have imagined the extraordinary pattern of intrigues, cover-ups, and blatant criminal behaviors that has emerged.
What do you say to somebody who says, I don't believe you?
It is unfortunate that we have been targeted as a scapegoat.
700 people died due to the Chinese regime's cover-up of SARS in 2002. 7,000 times that have died from COVID-19. What would 1,000 times that again, the next pandemic, mean for humankind? Not knowing the virus origin is an existential threat to humanity. In this special edition of The Wide Angle, join me as I delve into the source of the novel coronavirus.